I'm Rob. I make the better. That's what I do. So we have a nice hot summer week. So that's great. Except for me, when you have an illness, you don't want, like I do in this way, you don't really want to be outside because heat kind of messes you up a little bit more. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how reality works, language, perception, because people in therapy, for example, are not that good doing therapy. And the reason for that is because they learn and teach them the unconscious mind. That method doesn't work. Freud and Jung got it wrong. And the problem we have today is that 100 years later, give or take, we now have people writing books about it, teach you when they go to the university, and the problem with that unconscious mind stuff, it doesn't work. It's a concept. And concepts are like James Bond. Or you see me? From Santa Claus. There's a guy who do magic, lives in the North Pole and delivers presents in one day to most countries in the world. Not every country. There are some countries that every kid is naughty. They never get presents. So they stop believing in it. Kind of weird to think about it a bit. So how bad is therapy? Well, I had this client years ago, and they come to me and they told me that, they've been in therapy for 17 years. 30 years old at the time, been in therapy for 17 years, and I was like, all right, so what's going on? Well, I have a problem when I'm being alone. And, at the time, I said, well, if you've been 17 years in therapy, you need help in a new life. Anyway, so being alone, right? 17 years in therapy, I was thinking, kind of weird, right? And I said, you told your therapist that you're alone like that? And they were like, yeah. And I said, you've probably seen a lot of therapists over the years. Oh yeah. So I asked a control question. Do you have a problem being alone in a room when I'm here in the room with you? And the answer was no. So they told every therapist, and this has been through every therapist in town, and there's a lot of them, and they all teach you and make you do something called reflective question. That's very interesting that you're watching this tape, a video on YouTube. What do you think about that? Or they ask, oh, that's interesting. How do you do that? And how do you feel about it? How do you feel about it? How do you think about it? What do you think about it? Are reflective questions, right? But that doesn't work, right? They don't work. So 17 years later, she comes and sees me. And I'm like, after asking that control question, I was like, okay, so when do you have that problem being alone? And I get told, well, I come home from work, very specific, close the door behind me, okay, stand still in the hallway, specific again, listen, and it's silent, when I'm alone. 17 years she's been in therapy and been told that to every therapist, right? Couldn't do shit, because they teach you when you become a therapist, reflective questioning, how to, think about what your life is shit, and you need to think about that. I'm like, come on guys, you can do better, right? Anyway, I said, you're gonna go to work tomorrow? Yeah. Can you leave the radio on before you go to work? And the question was first, God, why? Can you just do it? Well, it'd be expensive. I said, I can pay you for the cost of the radio station. No, it's fine. Now, 3 days later, I get a call. I'm confused. I'm doing laundry, dishing, washing, I said, that's good. So I understand something in 2 minutes, that people who've been educated for 7 years, who have years of experience probably, and every therapist in town couldn't help her with that simple question because they couldn't ask that question. Why can't they ask that question? Because psychology has, painted themselves into the corner of the unconscious mind, which doesn't apply to human because it's a concept like Santa Claus, Lord of the Rings. You know about them, not real. But you can still write books about them, make movies and TV shows, or Harry Potter, still not real, right? Magic is not real, simply put. It's cool, but it's not real. So that's a good therapy so from here, right? 70 years in therapy, all you need to do was ask a question. When do you have a problem? Then tell them to leave the radio, because everything you do in reality is contextual. Let me give you a different example that you can relate to a little bit better. Because sometimes when I talk about previous clients or something like that, people go, well, I've never been in therapy. Well, they're going to ask you the question, that's interesting, you've never been in therapy. How do you feel about that? That's what they're going to do. They're going to ask stuff, quite reflective question like that. Leads nowhere. Doesn't work. So when you go to a museum and someone has painted a pipe on the wall in that painting, you look at the painting, your brain goes pipe. Because what your brain is going to do when you look at the painting, it's contextual, the memory of what that is going to jump up pipe. The problem when the brain does that for you is not that it does that, because that's what it does, is that it's contextual, and what you see on the painting is not a pipe. It will never be a pipe. Do you know why? Because it's not a pipe, it's a representation or an image of a pipe, but it's not and never will be a pipe. But your brain, when you look at the painting, go, pipe, pipe. Because as soon as you look at it, your brain just pops up the memory of what it's supposed to be, a pipe, but it's not a pipe. And you can't change. This is the reason, psychology got themselves trapped in a corner. They don't understand everything is contextual. So everything you interact with, people, the environment, is a different context. That's not reality. People get that confused a lot of times. Reality is memory that is contextual. So, and if I ask a different question, you know how radio works, right? You turn on the radio and music or people talking comes out. Let me ask you this question. Who invented that technology of the radio technology? Who invented that? It was Nikola Tesla. Most people don't have that name in their head. So when you ask them the question, who invented the radio, they say something else. Some Italian guy, right? But he was a criminal, a thief, and he infringed 7 of Nikola Tesla's patent of the radio technology. Tesla was a pretty cool guy. He also invented remote control, and this is in the 1800s. So he made a boat, and then he made a controller with a remote control to that boat. And then he had people on the shore. I mean, you talk about 1800s here, right? And they told them they could control the boat by shouting at it and controlling it by. So he had people, shouting, turn left, and the boat turned left on its own. It was like magic. Except Nikola Tesla had the little controller in his hand, because people didn't know about that stuff. This is 1800. This is over 120 years ago. 127 years ago. Ooh, that's a long time. So what your brain does in everything is create contextual memories. So it's isolate things in the context and then organize that so you know, So when someone goes into therapy, they are, basically in for that kind of reflective question. Well, it's really interesting going to therapy. How do you feel about that? I don't know, my life is shit. Are you not supposed to help me with that? And the therapist goes, well, that's interesting. What do you think about that? They keep asking those questions, by the way. Like that, reflective question. Doesn't work. Never will. Because they teach you when you go 7 years into therapy to do the unconscious model, which is a concept and it's not real. It doesn't apply to human consciousness and explains how reality and behavior and perception and such actually works. Because contextual memory, right? So when you go into the museum, you look at the painting and you see a pipe, your brain goes, pipe. And you can't stop it. This is why it's so hard for people to change, because you have a contextual memory. Brains are, straightforward in that way. You can understand something like, well, I understand it's an image and representation of a pipe, and it's not actually a pipe on that painting. As soon as you look at it, your brain goes, pipe. And you can't stop it. You can't change it. That's what people, go into therapy. I have this kind of a problem. It's contextual. Sometimes a contextual like that client that's been 17 years in therapy and I could fix it in 2 minutes was because I understand everything is contextual. Because when I was working with clients before I got ill and sick in this kind of stuff, I was very effective and I had to develop my own technology because the technology I come from couldn't teach that stuff. Because I figured this out on my own, that, okay, it's always going to be about context. Once you understand that, you have a precision instrument to do things and understand people's worldview. And I apply this for other fields, like dyslexia. So in my other channel, there is if you're a parent with a dyslexic kid or reading difficulty, they have, you can apply that. You can watch the videos, apply that, give them feedback. Because you have to teach them a new contextual memory about how to read. You can't do that. And you can't explain it to them. A lot of people believe, inaccurately, well, if I explain things conceptually to people, they can do it. And you try that with a kid that can't ride a bike or swim. Hey kid, can you swim? No, I can't swim. Okay, all you need to do is doing this when you're swimming and do this with your legs. And then you put in the water and you do that and you keep your head over the water. Piece of cake. And the kid goes, you understand? And the kid goes, oh yeah, I understand. All right. And you throw them out in the water and they drown. And you go, that's kind of weird. I explained it to the kid said they understood it, and they can't fucking do it. Why is that? Now you shouldn't do that because, killing kids like that is not a good thing. And you would be a very bad swim teacher if you do that. So what do people do? Well, they give them some, floating things and try to, get around that stuff and shallow water so they don't drown, and keep attention on them so, they don't do that either. But you can explain something to people, they will understand it perfectly. You can't do it. Because you have to teach them how to do it, and that's called a skill. Back in 2008, a book came out called The Talent Code. That talent is not born, it's something you can grow. You can actually build it. But the book is kind of a mess because the guy who wrote it didn't understand how it works. Because everything you do is a skill set, and it's contextual. So once you learn to ride a bike, you can always do it, right? But you can wait now for 50 years, never ride a bike, and you can still do it. Right? And the reason why you can do that is because it creates a distinction of difference, how to keep the balance on the bike. And that distinction is something you learn when you're a baby. You learn to identify different distinctions in the environment. People like parents, family, friends, assholes, stuff like that. Well, if you don't know who is an asshole, that's kind of a fucking problem. Some people can elect him as a president or something like that. That would be fucking horrible. So when you're growing up as a kid, you have to learn how to identify language because you can't speak and understand it. It's just gibberish until you learn to make distinction of apple. That's an apple. Cool. Because the kid doesn't know that. You didn't know that. Once upon a time, you didn't know what an apple was, or an orange, or a banana. You could see this kind of stuff. You didn't know what it was because you didn't have a word for it. And he probably doesn't remember that. So when you're growing up, you learn distinction of difference when you interact with the environment. That's people and stuff around us. You know, doors or sound and such, physical, visual, stuff like that. So when it was developed, because when I was working with clients, you know, I would figure things out, because I have a tendency to, when I'm working with people and doing things, is that when I teach people, I really like it to work and to do things that actually. So after a while, I understood that so-called unconscious mind people teach you in psychology, for example. They also use it now. They feel like NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. Not to be confused with the natural language processing, two different fields, two different contexts. And they still believe and teach about the unconscious mind stuff and hypnosis. It's just pure bullshit. If you understand this, there is no hypnosis. There is no, you know, unconscious mind stuff. It's always going to be contextual, memory, interacting. Once you know that, you can help people sort it out. If you're a therapist, for example, or a coach, you can help people improve and sort it out so they don't engage with that stuff. This is 26 years ago. I was working with a client. She came to me. Had been in therapy for a year, and I asked what was going on. She said, you know, I have low self-esteem. And I thought, where do people get that word? Self-esteem, they get it from therapy, right? And I have some problem with work and so on. And I looked at her and said, okay, what do you think all that is? And then she just looks at me and goes, well, not because, I think it's because of my twin sister. You know, twin? She looks like you. And she was like, oh yeah, well, that makes sense. And she looked at me and like, it does? Yeah, I mean, looking at your twin, it's like looking in a mirror, except that's not a mirror and that's not you. But it looks like you, but it's not you. She was confused about who she was, and the brain does this. When she looked at the twin, her brain was, confused about it. She couldn't make that distinction of difference, who she, you know, the twin of her and she. So twins can actually get into that kind of identification issues. Kind of weird. Anyway, I worked with her for one session. She came back for a follow-up. Totally fine. No problem with self-esteem anymore. 1 year in therapy, one session with me, fine. Pretty cool at the time. And I told her, I talked to her, she was fine. I said, you know, I have a question I have to ask you. And I'm sorry, I said. But are you the same girl that was here the first time, or did you send your twin here this time? Twins does that, you know. And I still remember her face, and how she said, you know, that's funny. That's a control question, if you didn't understand that, about the work I did at the time. I knew she was fine, but she didn't know it. Remember, distinction of difference is very important. Sometimes I had people, you know, and as I was talking to them, you know, I said, you know, that's kind of crazy. And they look at me and go, that's not crazy. I'm not crazy. And I said, well, here's what you said. And I, you know, put back what they told me, right? And then they looked at me and said, you know, that's crazy. And I said, that's what you're doing. And they changed. Just like that. Now, the reason why they changed is because when I told them what they were doing, that they themselves had explained to me, I allowed them to create a comparison of a different perspective and source. And once they get that, oh, but that's crazy. Boom, they change, because, you know, no one really wants to be crazy. I think no one really wants to be an asshole. They just, you know, doesn't know they are one. And then you have to tell them that all the things they do are asshole things, until they get the message and they go, oh, fuck, man, I'm an asshole. And then they can change. Otherwise they can't. You're going to continue to be an asshole. Like a planet or something like Uranus or something like that, right? That's funny. I don't know who named the planet Uranus, but whoever did it must have a sense of humor. Right? So when you can create that kind of comparison, if you do it properly, you create a distinction of difference. And when you create that distinction of difference, And then you can change context. Otherwise you can't change. People don't know that. There was this guy in the Netherlands, I think. He was an engineer and something like that. Anyway, he went on a tour and talked about it. Some guys in the garage, they made a bike for him. And the steering wheel, when you were steering to the right, the wheel turned left, the opposite way, right? So they gave him this bike and said, try to ride this bike. And he could ride a normal bike. And then when he tried to ride this bike, he couldn't do it. It took him up to a year to be able to ride the bike. So he went on tour and he said that, talking about this stuff. And he put the bike on the stage and said, anyone who can ride the bike from one end to the next without putting on the feet to regain the balance, he explained how the bike worked. And he demonstrated it also, right? And people understood it perfect. They can ride the bike. They understand what this guy is explaining with the bike. I can do it. No, they couldn't. Because as soon as they tried to, the brain has coded contextual memory about how riding a bike a specific way. And even if you understand how to do something totally opposite perfectly, you can't do it because you don't have the skill. So everybody who wanted to get $100 on the stage riding that bike from one end to the next couldn't do it. This kid was able to do it in 3 weeks or something like that, right? So why is this happening? Well, everything you do is a skill, which is contextual, like riding a bike. You change how the bike works, you can't do it. You can understand how to do it. You can understand if I turn right, it goes left. Turn left, it goes right. Okay, I get it. But you can't do it. You don't have the skill. In golf, people learn about golf mechanics, swing mechanics, that teach them to be stuck, create compensations, and struggle for the rest of life, build injuries in the body, all that stuff. And I'm talking about two pros now, by the way, not amateurs. And they don't know why. Two pros doesn't understand the golf swing mechanic at all. Two pro gurus doesn't understand because they can't even explain how does the connection works in the golf swing. You can ask any two pro, you can ask any two pro guru, they don't know. You can ask them, how does the connection work? Give them, videotape them, the explanation, post it, and I will tell you they got it wrong. They don't know. Because what's going to happen when you follow that explanation they give you, it's not going to work. You're going to lose connection, you're going to lose connection, you're going to lose connection, you're going to lose connection. Right? Ask two pros, how often do you lose your swing? And it kind of goes to shit. And it will say basically all the time. It never works. That's the PA for you guys and ladies and everybody else. So they teach you something that will never just keep working. Riding a bike, you learn it, boom, can always do it. 50 years later, never ride a bike, take out the bike, boom, you can do it. It always works. Because when you code things into your brain, and it's not muscle memory, it's actually brain memory, and you learn that contextual memory and, your brain organizes around it. Once it's organized around it, you have created a distinction different. When you're riding a bike, keeping your balance. So when you change the steering to go the other opposite way, your balance goes up, goes to shit, because your brain now goes, what the fuck, that's not supposed to happen. Even if you understand it. Because there is two different things here. Your brain doing things, and you understand what the brain is doing. It's two different things. It's not unconscious, it's contextual. Once you understand that, a whole new world opens up as a coach or as a therapist or something like that. Because you can understand people much better. You can understand their worldview. You can give them, a question of comparison and ask them, well, if you do it that way, it seems kind of crazy. And they're going to look at you. No, that's not crazy. And then you explain back what they just said, and they go, well, that's crazy. That's what you're doing. They change that. Because they create that comparison, they create a distinction of difference, and they understand, oh, I didn't get that. And then we can change. Except when they go to the museum and look at the painting with the pipe, and they go, pipe. Oh, Nikola Tesla, right. So we had this week of like 30 degrees Celsius, and I usually spend my indoor days. Last year I got this electric moped because when you have this illness, you have a lot of funny things that can happen. One of the things was you get acid build up in my thighs. So when I was riding a bike on flat ground, not uphill, that was even worse. You could move. On flat ground, I got sometimes so much acid in my legs I couldn't really pedal. So I got, this is not working. I need a solution. So I researched on electric bikes and such, and what I did was to get an electric moped. So I can just, use a trowel, and it goes, and it's silent, relatively, And it's also, looks cool. Basically, you buy this kind of bikes for battery, and they look cool, because technology-wise, they're not that different. So, you have to do your research, you have to find out what's going on. That's what I did in golf. I realized, 50 years ago, after doing some research, that two pro gurus doesn't know what you're talking about. I said that Olivia Cole lose her swing and mechanic and game, especially game, when she better start working with her. And because what he did, people can't see this, by the way. I can, because I may learn to do that distinction of difference in the context. When I looked at Lydia Cole after Leber was worked with her, he added, so she had to do more muscle activity to do the same thing. So let's say you have to do this, right? It's easy, right? But now you have to do it this. Suddenly you're doing the same thing, but now this is a lot more effort, and your brain and your body go, oh, I just need to do this. That's what she did before Leber. After Leber, she had to do all this stuff. And that would cause, over time, a degradation of her performance, and she has not regained that kind of level of performance yet. When things are hard-coded in your nervous system, in your brain, you sort of mess with that to make it more difficult to swing and play golf. You don't really know what you're doing. What I try to do is, figure out how to simplify it so it actually works, so people, And I had this guy 3 years ago. He told me he's going to go all in on my stuff with golf. Change his grip, do the drills, and he tells me this story. I'm 50 years old. I hit 240 yards, and for 2 years I went with a PGA teacher trying to get longer. He actually lost distance. He was like 260, he went to 240. He wanted more distance, and he lost 20 yards, and he played like that for 2 years. Absolute shit. And then he tells me he's going to go all in on my stuff. Okay, but I understand people. After a week I said, hey dude, can you post doing the drill, tilt and lift? And he said, oh yeah. And he posted a video doing the drill. I said, that's not tilt and lift. And then he tells me this. I'm 50 years old. No, he didn't say that. But, you have to keep track of what people do and the context they're coming from. He's 50 years old. He knows shit, right? He's smart. And he says, well, doing your drill feels like shit. And I said, yeah, so that's my instruction. You're going to follow my instruction? No. You said you're going to go all in on my stuff. You have to do the drills that like I laid out. And he was like, man, I'm 50 years old and I have to do shit that feels like shit. And it's because the instructions laid out like that. Oh, okay. So he caved in, started doing the drill, tilt and lift properly. Because I knew one thing, when you give people an instruction, they think they know better than me. And they don't follow the instruction. They don't, videotape them and, make sure they don't do shit they shouldn't do. As I talk about in the videos when I instruct. 6 weeks later, he went from 240 yards to 350 yards. That's a 100 meter increase in 6 weeks. Not kidding. That's one of the successful, I just gonna say it, you can't expect to be 350 yards yourself. But I have a 66-year-old, he's a senior now, I think he's retired. He's at 260 yards, give or take, with his stuff. And yes, 260 yards for a 66-year-old, pretty good. And he told me that he had been playing during spring this year, and he was able to carry a 320-yard par 4 for the first time, twice, at 66 years old. So 40 years of golf, he's never been able to do that. But now he was able to do something he never done before. Because he changed his grip and started listening to what I was teaching. Because people have this idea that they must know better because the brain is telling them. It can't be true. Because you have all this golf information in your head, in your memory, about how golf is worked. And all that information comes from one source, PGA, 2 proofs. And let's look at the statistic people have with that instruction. 99% of the PGA teachers will never reach scratch handicap. So you can never play a golf course the way it's supposed to be played, on par, right? Second thing, 90% of you will never reach and hold a single level of handicap skill. The massive failure of PGA instruction is probably the worst instruction in any sport in the world, by a large margin. It's just bad. They don't understand what you're teaching. It doesn't work. But once you teach something that doesn't work, like the unconscious mind, PGA instruction for golf, and then you expect it to work. When it doesn't, you kind of get confused a bit. Well, it's supposed to work with this unconscious stuff, and then you try to help your clients as a therapist, as a coach, by asking, how do you feel about that? That you can't golf, do your golfing properly, Jordan Spike or Brooks Koepka? How does it feel like your body's shutting down all the time and you lose connection? How does that feel for you? What do you think about that? As you can notice, those kind of questions leads nowhere. It doesn't give a solution. It just rolls the tape, rolls the tape, rolls the tape. Leads nowhere. That's because it's contextual also, conceptually. Because there are 2 levels of the understanding here. One is your brain doing things in the context. It's very contextual, pipe. And the second one is you understand it's a pipe, an image of a pipe, but it's not a pipe. But it doesn't translate to your brain because you have to create the proper distinction or difference in comparison to be able to, kind of go look at the painting and go, hey, that's not a pipe. But most people never get there. I think that's maybe an Italian thing, I guess. I don't know. So yeah, I wanted to give you a little bit of a reference of the work I've been doing over 30 years. I had to develop my own technology when I was working with clients due to that when I was working with them, what I was told to do and operate didn't work the way it's supposed to. And at the time, I didn't know it was, all this unconscious bullshit. So I had to develop a better technology, so I did. And at some point, maybe this winter I will start writing a book about all this stuff. And hopefully I can, write it well enough so I can, send it to a publisher and they can publish it because I think it's really good. Because when you do things that no one else has been doing the last 120 years, people don't have a reference to the material. You believe there must be an unconscious mind because everybody doing research and teach you that. Still not true, it's just a concept, it doesn't work. Because it's like golf, PGA. They've been teaching that shit for over 100 years, it doesn't work. They don't do anything about it. They think it's going to work, but it never does. Ask any 2 pro. Lose your swinging lately? Oh yeah, 5 minutes ago. I'm trying to get it back again, and again, and again, and again. At some point, people get the message. It takes time. One of the guys that you've seen here swing, it's been a while since I posted him, but he spent 5 years, and he said, I want to get better at golf. I'm going to take some golf lessons. So he went to a PGA teacher, and it didn't work. So he went to another one. Over a period of 5 years, he went to 12 different PGA teachers. Oh, I'm getting exhausted here, so I'm just going to run this out. And it just didn't work. Every time we went and played, we went to shit. They had TrackMan, they had PGA education, they have the same education like everybody else has. And he did the drills, he did everything, it just didn't work. And then he contacted me, this is some years ago, and he said, hey, I've been trying to get better for 5 years. And I said, yeah. You think, and I've been met 12 different PGA teachers. Yeah, you think you can help me? Yeah, send me your swing, I can look at it. It's amazing, and I looked at it and I was like, oh yeah, you're not doing what you're supposed to do. And he's like, what? But I've been at 12 different PGA teachers. I mean, we're talking about the best in the field here. And I said, well, they don't know what they're doing up there. So I told him to start working on. We worked on that, went to the range, hit the ball better than ever, and then he became a tester for me. He didn't need to go to PGA anymore because he found me. So yeah. Traffic, people working, talking, TV, whatever, is life, right? But to live a better life, you need technology, and some technologies people teach, like the unconscious mind doesn't work, or PGA for golf doesn't work either. So yeah, there is a better way, as I explained here today and showcase a little bit. Once you understand everything is a contextual memory that the brain operates from, then you can give the proper comparison and give a distinctional difference, and then people can change. Because you can't change the situations because it's contextual. And since it's contextual memory, it's physical, right? Think about it. Your brain sends neural pathways. You can't change that. You have to build a new one, a different one, a new memory, basically, of distinctional difference, so you can do things better in a way that you would want it to be done. Anyway, I'm exhausted. Oh fuck, man, this is so hot, and there is talking like this is okay. I can't do much more than this, but I usually once upon a time when I was teaching, educating people, I could do this for 3 days in a row without even trying. Now this exhausts me. It's not much, but it's something. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it.